Hello! Hello, 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 hello. Welcome everybody. I'm gonna let some people funnel into the stream before we start playing. Get some coffee. Hello, Taekwondo guy. Nice of you to make the emoji face. So yeah, I just stumbled upon, this is 15 Years of Ratchet, a Lombax story. I stumbled upon this GDC talk, and I thought, wow, they must have really just dug in the wells to find, Brian Algayer and TJ Fixman. They must have really plumbed the depths to find these guys and hastily assemble this talk. But actually, it's 5 years old. And this is so up my alley, and I thought for certain that I would have seen this by now, but apparently not. Echo? Oh. Is there an echo? Oh my god. Brother, I wouldn't be able to know because I can't hear any audio on my end now. Oh, I'm sorry, them. It's very late. I should have probably tried streaming earlier. I did promise Eurogang an earlier stream. Hi, ADAC. You're sipping on coffee too? That's nice. Do you have Moomin Mux? Polyester Pimp, welcome. Dinomatrix, hi. I need to get to your message. I saw you message me earlier. I got a notification, but I was setting up the stream. Oh, the echo wasn't real. All right. You scared me. You make me paranoid. So yes, this is 15 Years of Ratchet and Clank, a long backstory. Oh, you have an IKEA mug? That's terrible. I actually have thought about, because I often eat at IKEA, I think that it's okay for me to steal their mugs. Because I'm already paying for the coffee. Why should I not be allowed to take the mugs home with me, you know? Anyways, let's get started. And, as always, if the audio levels are messed up, please let me know so that I can fix it.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for coming.
He talks kind of fast. Let's take this down a little bit. Yeah, we're gonna play it a little bit faster because there's a lot of okays in this, and we need to get through this.
You have to silence those noisemakers, devices, and don't forget to evaluate us at the end of this talk. We'd love to hear your feedback. So we are very excited to share our journey about the Ratchet and Clank franchise.
In Germany, you can always take the glasses with you home. Is that a German law thing, or is that just theft? Also, for newcomers, because I sometimes get comments when I do these streams, I do a lot of pauses. This is not this is not a reaction stream. I'm not making ooh and ah and oh my god noises here. We're having a conversation about the stuff that they're talking about. So feel free to contribute in chat. Have I played Ninja Gaiden? No. Black Sigma. I am a Sigma though, so probably I should play that game. People are always telling me I'm a real Sigma.
And why it has endured. But first we should a little bit about ourselves. So I'm Brian Algayer. I was the design director on the first Ratchet and Clank game. I was also the creative director on the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4 game. And I was very fortunate to work with this guy.
And I'm TJ Fixman. I was the senior writer at Insomniac Games from 2007 to 2013. I worked on all the PS3 and PS4 Ratchet titles with this guy. I also served as a creative consultant for
it's his fault.
Movie properties like Transformers, G.I. Joe, and Micronauts.
So before we get started, we just want to share a little clip that we like quite a bit, and this will help some of you who may be unfamiliar with the franchise. All right. I don't know what just happened there. We had a technical difficulty.
Oh, GDC doesn't believe in editing.
It worked when we were rehearsing in our hotel room this morning.
Crack in Time was your favorite, my opinion. I think that the PlayStation 3 generation games are vastly inferior to the originals, but I really grew up on the originals, and I cut my teeth very deep in them, and they very clearly changed their design priorities when they moved to the 7th generation, and I think they probably would have been better off if they would have just done a sort of spiritual sequel to Ratchet and Clank and made that the future series. Because I think that there's a lot of good stuff in the future series, but I genuinely believe that those games are kind of held back by the baggage from the earlier games. Especially because I'm always just in my head contrasting the sort of cynical, snarky, take a look at this guy's sort of attitude of the older games with the more earnest Pixar storytelling in, not Pixar, but that sort of more earnest, we actually take things very seriously. This is an actually, like, this universe is real and we're not taking the piss out of it anymore approach in the Future series. Of the Future games, I actually think Nexus is the best one. It's kind of a disaster in many ways, but it also just has a lot of weird experimental things going on. I actually talk about this in, I think it's the Armored Core 4 or Armored Core 4 Answer Retrospective. I talk about this how, it's the Armored Core 4 Answer Retrospective, I think, where there's a sequence in that game where you're just sort of flying in a very quiet, very understated, silent, moody, up a mountain. And it reminded me of a sequence from Ratchet Nexus where we're flying around in a sewer. And I was really interested in all of those interesting mechanics and everything they were doing. Taking these, we had like, it was a weird sort of dark area where you had like a flashlight and you were walking around this orphanage picking up audio logs. It was really weird for a Ratchet game, and I think they probably would have done better to do a spiritual sequel. Yeah, it was in 4 Answer. Yeah. But yeah, I don't hate the Future series. They just, I never fell in love with them like I did the originals. Mostly would have been interested in hearing your thoughts about the Vigor Capital because of that urban video you did. The Vigor Capital. Could you give me a bit more information on that one? Oh, is that from Ninja Gaiden?
Okay, this should now work. Yes!
Whoa.
Space. It's huge. So huge, in fact, that if you lost your car keys in it, they would be almost impossible to find. Luckily for Ratchet.
I think the voice actor who voiced Quark, in very recently, I think he retired from this. But he may have actually come back out of retirement to voice Quark one final time for that Ripped Apart game.
Captain Copernicus
Rift
L.
Apart.
Quark was on the case. His mission, rescue the Lombax's one and only friend. Yep, without Clank, Ratchet was alone in the universe. Alone.
You realize the ship has an ejector seat, right?
Sorry, I guess you could say I've been a little antsy in my pantsy at the thought of getting back into the hero business. Yep, these wild stallions have been in the stable too long.
Right. Look, just keep your eyes peeled.
Also, I have a very unpopular opinion here. I love James Arnold Taylor as a voice actor. He does great work with Obi-Wan, and I like his Ratchet, but I prefer the voice actor for the original. They made the change because the original voice for Ratchet and the original characterization, he was kind of mean, he was kind of a jerk, and they wanted to sort of soften him up and make him more likable and charming. And I think they succeeded, but I prefer the characterization in the first one.
Cowan says this sector's crawling with mercenaries.
Rest easy, my friend. My vigilance is both eternal and peripheral.
Oh, that's not my mouse. It's not my mouse on the screen.
Hang on. Shifting to evasive maneuver.
This here is my mouse.
Oh no, we're gonna die! Oh, good thing I'm wearing clean underwear.
Will you shut up? We are not gonna die! A billion! Engage gravimetric stabilizers.
Negative. Stabilizers offline. Thrusters offline. Landing flaps offline.
All right, so we're gonna die.
All right.
Ha 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 ha.
Sorry, so the reason why it worked was because it wasn't in presenter view. And now we have to go back to presenter view. This is like the most awkward presentation I've ever given. Okay, here we go.
Maybe you should have practiced, huh?
Okay, and everything is now going to work for the rest of the presentation. Okay. Yeah, my computer's mind of its own. Okay.
Imagine if I did this in my videos. I was like, I just had technical difficulties every 2 minutes.
It's really hard to believe it's been over 15 years since the first Ratchet & Clank was developed at Insomniac Games back in 2002. I feel very fortunate, we feel very fortunate to be standing here looking back at this long-running franchise. So I'm curious, how many people played Ratchet & Clank back in the day in 2002?
Me.
Wow, okay, that's a lot of hands. All right, that's awesome.
This video, it's 5 years old. It's from 2018. It's a 2018 talk. So this is after the remake, but before Rift Apart.
How many people worked on the Ratchet & Clank games? Hey, all right, we got some Insomniac, some old school.
I've never worked on one of these.
Okay, so
but I would love to. I think Ratchet and Clank, and I may have said this at some point, this is probably the only franchise I would like to work on. I don't really like. I love the Silent Hills, but I wouldn't want to make a Silent Hill. I'm more interested in just, if I did a horror game, I just want to do my own horror game. But I think I have ideas to bring to Ratchet and Clank.
So never, did I dream that very first game would lead to 6 games on the PlayStation 2, 6 games on the PlayStation 3, mobile games, a manga series, a comic book line, toys and vinyl figures, art prints, tattoos and cosplayers. That's when you really hit it big. Adorable plushies.
Ratchet was one of those franchises I was always interested to play but never got around to. Yeah, it's really interesting. The PlayStation 2 mascot platformers, they're so strange because they're kind of hard to crack. They're not very newcomer. Like, you had to kind of be there to be able to just jump into these universes like Jak and Daxter and Sly Cooper and Ratchet and Clank. They're so weird, but I love it. And if anybody here hasn't seen it, I think one of my favorite videos I made on Ratchet and Clank. I keep renaming it. It's like the 30 lessons I learned from Ratchet and Clank.
Feature-length movie, and in 2016 we made a game based on the movie.
I said it in my marathon of Ratchet and Clank too. Thank you.
Despite how confusing that all sounds, the 2016 reboot was actually massively successful. It's our fastest.
Because of all of the playthroughs I've done of Ratchet and Clank over the years, Ratchet and Clank might be the most covered series on the channel? ?
Selling Ratchet game ever, and it won Family Game of the Year at the DICE Awards. And one of the things that surprises us most is that over the years, platformers and mascot-style games have become kind of a tough sell. Console gamers have been drifting more towards darker and more realistic fare, so it's really cool to see that Ratchet & Clank still has a place in audiences' hearts.
So out of the 14 Ratchet & Clank games made in the last 15 years, Insomniac developed 11 of them. We started with a trilogy of the first Ratchet & Clank, and for us it's certainly been a journey fraught with both ups and downs.
Insomniac turned out a new title almost every year, which feels insane in retrospect. I can brag for them because I was an employee at the time, but they did this all in-house with a 35-person team. But I promise this is not just going to be a stroll down memory lane. We'd like to treat this...
I played a bunch of Ratchet 2, 3, Slythe 2, and 3, and I never finished any of them.
...a franchise post-mortem. So we can talk to you about what worked, what didn't, what really didn't, and offer some tips on why we believe some franchises endure. But to do that, we're going to have to travel back in time. And fortunately, we have a...
Yeah, Kekere has been pretty well covered in the channel. I recently saw, I was linked on Twitter, a video from Ogomi. It's... I can't remember the name. It's a game FromSoft made, and it's just like a minute video talking about stagnant water. And I saw that, and I felt so vindicated.
Also happens to be 100% real.
Like it's a narration from the game.
Are you there?
Yes, sir. Senior Caretaker Sigma 0426A standing by at the Great Clock.
Awesome. Can you take us back to March of 2001?
I don't know. Orvis said I'm not supposed to use this thing as a time machine, but I guess I can make an exception for the Insomniac folks. Stand by for temporal displacement.
Ha
Sorry doing that.
They're not even. Right. They're not even living into it.
2001. Insomniac's new game was going to be our 5th game. We'd made Disruptor and the 3 Spyro Dragons before that, and our team size was 35 people. George W. Bush was in office. Phones made just phone calls back then, and the laptop gun was all the rage.
But
classic cinematic masterpieces. TJ, where were you back then when all this happened?
In 2001, I was in college, so probably someone in Orlando with a really bad Slim Shady haircut. Let's just check in and confirm. Yep, that's it.
Ooh. Did you do that to your hair on purpose?
Sadly, I did. I did do that to my hair on purpose.
Okay, so let's talk about Ratchet and Clank.
So, because we're talking about 2001, and I'm sorry, everybody, you all know what's coming now. But 9/11, Obviously tragic, horrible. But there's an interesting thing. If you've ever seen the movie Master of Disguise, they were filming that movie when 9/11 happened. And they were specifically filming this scene, if you've ever seen it. Dana Carvey was wearing this when they all learned that 9/11 had happened. And I feel like I don't know how you mentally ever recover from that. You know, you just this awful tragedy happens and you're sitting there in your dumb turtle costume. Like, what are you supposed to make of life? How can you take it seriously, you know? Anyways.
The beginning. So Ratchet and Clank actually started out as a girl with a stick. Actually, our code name
What?
was Girl with a Stick. And so we had worked on the Spyro games. We wanted to try doing something a little bit older. And for about a year, we worked on this project, which was kind of a mashup of Tomb Raider meets Legend of Zelda. And the team just wasn't feeling it. And
Okay, but she kind of just feels like this concept art. It has massive vibes of just an alternate version of Jak and Daxter. You know what I mean? It's like a very similar sort of futuristic past sort of adventure action game style, like 2000s. You know, I think that would have been really funny. But I'm glad we got Ratchet instead.
our CEO, Ted Price, saw the writing on the wall and he had the courage to just kill the project. It was time to work on something that we could all really get excited about.
Ted Price, I have a lot of love for Ted Price. When Sony bought Insomniac, I was really hoping that they were buying Insomniac games specifically so that they could elevate Ted Price to be their CEO of PlayStation. And they didn't do that. They had Jim Ryan instead, but I was really hoping for Ted Price. Because I hate when non-game developers are put into management positions in the game industry. I feel like if you're not connected to the industry you're working in, you have no place being, you know, if you didn't come up making games, whatever love you have for the industry, it's just not going to resonate quite as well. This is why Hiroshi Yamauchi, I think his name was, when he tyrannically hijacked the entire industry and created like the Nintendo seal of quality to sort of force developers to make good games after the crash. He also sheltered Miyamoto very carefully so that marketing people and the lawyers and the producers and the executives, they weren't messing with him. Miyamoto was given pretty free reign, and then they bought out HAL Laboratories so that they could pick Iwata to lead Nintendo after Yamauchi left. So yeah, I have a lot of love for Ted Price, and I think it's sad that they went with Jim Ryan instead of him.
So we went back to the drawing board. We started coming up with a bunch of ideas, and our chief
Miss
creative
Spyro,
officer,
I also
Brian
miss Spyro.
Hastings, offered a simple idea that got everyone really excited. And that was an alien that travels from planet to planet collecting weapons and gadgets. And as simple as that sentence is, it actually got us really excited and sparked our imaginations. And we started to draw upon inspirations on how to create this new alien. So one of Brian's early inspirations was the book The Little Prince, but there were plenty of other influences like Marvin the Martian, Star Wars, Conker's Bad Fur Day,
What?
Banjo-Kazooie,
That's obvious.
Miyazaki's Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, Super Metroid, The Iron Giant, Super Mario 64, and Legend of Zelda. One thing we all
Wow.
loved about Brian's pitch was this idea of
Wow, okay. I just have to kind of mentally reboot for a second. I didn't know that. That's super cool.
exploring the unknown universe. Our team was excited by the idea of building this living, breathing, colorful galaxy that people could discover. Character artist Dave Girton began to...
Yeah, and actually that's something that you see change as the Ratchet games went on, is that in the first game you always got like an infobot before you went to the next planet, and it introduced you to a character who was like a representative of that planet, and then you went to the planet and you'd meet that character, and like when you went to Callipo 3, the Gadgetron planet, when you went and met Skid McMarx, when you went to Al's RoboShack, when you met Quark, the infobots always sort of glamorized the encounters, and then cynical reality would always slap Ratchet and Clank in the face whenever they got there, and the celebrities and the sort of big shots that they saw in the infobots would just kind of like, you know, trying to hit them up for money, basically. This I think is the worst change as the series went on, is that Ratchet and Clank 2 just has like the ongoing narrative of stopping the thugs for less, to try to, free the protopet, but then actually you have to stop, like, it's just like this one ongoing narrative, and the planets aren't, exploring exotic worlds. You still do it, but that's not how the adventure is characterized so much anymore. And by the third game, you just have like a core cast, like the Q Force. You have a crew, and because of the sort of more militaristic multiplayer objective mission markers you often get in those games, in that game, it's sort of exotic, I want to see this place and interact with that environment, that's basically gone. And by the time Gladiator comes out, that is completely dead. And even though they kind of brought it back in the Future series, I don't think it ever quite reached the zenith that we saw in the first game, which is one reason I think that Ratchet and Clank 1 probably has the best map lineup. I also think the map, the level design is just really strong in the first game, but I can't stress how much I love the characterization of the planets. Let's move on.
Sketch our hero, starting with this lizard-inspired creature who had this
Goodbye, them.
weapon and extendable
Sleep
arm.
tight.
He was cute, but not very relatable, and lacked that charm we wanted. He needed to be warmer and more approachable, and eventually evolved into our famous furry mechanic here. I first heard Ted Price actually coin the term Lombax to describe Ratchet's race. We also like the idea of him having a voice, which is very new for mascot characters back then. So we needed someone for Ratchet to talk to. So the original design for Clank, we painted him as...
Oh, that's interesting. See, I always figured that Ratchet and Clank was a hybrid of, and I'm learning other things now, but I had always figured it was a hybrid of Banjo-Kazooie and Crash Bandicoot. Well, with, you have a furry mascot and he, breaks crates, but you also have, it's a duo. And they have different movement mechanics. And I had figured that Clank came about because they wanted to expand on the movement range, like in Banjo-Kazooie, but apparently he came because they wanted someone for Ratchet to talk to first. That's interesting.
Childlike C-3PO, we even experimented with having a child voice with a British accent, and it just wasn't working. It felt like this kind of weird father-son relationship, so we decided to put the two on more equal footing and focus on making it more of a buddy story. For Clank's particular backstory, he was written as being this factory defect who almost got scrapped and was saved from the assembly line.
Brian Hastings and Ted imagined the game as feeling almost like an intergalactic buddy cop story. The wisecracking alpha would shoot first and ask questions later, while the logical sidekick would act as a spoil. It's a dynamic that we've seen a lot in movies, but if you drop it into a game full of anthropomorphic characters, you get something really fresh. And we almost imagine sort of like a Lethal Weapon meets Saturday morning cartoons.
Ooh.
So, we certainly wanted humor to be a prominent aspect of the game, so we developed another franchise.
Okay, he was named after Captain Kirk. I know that. Somebody was rolling their tongue while they said Captain Kirk, and they came out Captain Quark, and that's how you get Captain Quark.
Favorite, which was Captain Quark, he became such a vital part of the series that when he was left out, fans would actually be upset. We view this guy as being kind of like a Homer Simpson meets Captain Kirk.
That's actually a pretty funny characterization.
Along with places that he would travel, like space stations and high-tech cities.
So we wanted to really get going quickly and start putting these levels into the game. The problem was we were just starting on PlayStation.
Why haven't they released this? Let me walk in the jungle diorama. What is this?
Engine and tools, and
probably you can't walk there. It's probably just scenic.
Fortunately, we're working with industry legend Mark Cerny. Hi, Mark. Hey, Mark. Who?
Oh my God! Yes. If not Ted Price, Mark Cerny. Mark Cerny is the architect of the PlayStations. He makes all the PlayStations now, and I have this theory that he's the guy who actually finished The Last Guardian, because we know Fumito Ueda, basically his version was completed, it just needed some polishing, and it needed optimization, but they couldn't optimize it any better for the PlayStation 3, and it's actually kind of interesting that when they rebooted development for the PlayStation 4, they actually cut some stuff. They cut some interactions from the boy and Trico. And it's very weird that you get command prompts which on the screen when you play the game, which are like an image of the controller and the buttons you're supposed to press. And that doesn't feel very Fumito Ueda. He always did button prompts, but the controller prompt and how excessive it was, I always felt was really weird. until I saw footage from Knack, and I noticed that it was the exact same layout. I think the controller was even in the same corner of the screen, and I kind of got this crazy idea because Mark Cerny, he had a year break while The Last Guardian was being developed, and he's one of the special thanks, and I think he's like credited as maybe a producer or something on The Last Guardian. So I had this crazy idea, and that I totally believe, but I've never been able to fully substantiate. It's just a lot of circumstantial evidence points to this, that Mark Cerny came in and finished The Last Guardian with Fumito Ueda's sort of guidance. And I would bet money on this, but I don't think we're going to know if this is true for a few more years. Hey, Shayna.
Had this, he was helping
We're talking about
Ratchet
and Clank.
to create these dioramas, which are also now called.
It's literally Jack One on God.
Create the starting level of a game and actually look like.
Oh, you can walk there.
And that started to get people really excited, and definitely got interest from Sony and starting to give us the green lights. So one of my first tasks was taking Metropolis and turning it into a real design. And we
oh my God! Oh my God, guys! This is the thumbnail. I've been looking for such a long time for like the Ratchet video I made to have like a thumbnail of like a blueprint. This is it! Let me just jump back a little bit here.
Definitely got interest from Sony and starting to give us the green lights. So one of my first tasks was taking Metropolis and turning it into a real design, and we started to develop the metrics for how fast and far Ratchet would run and jump. The same metrics that would be used consistently throughout the 15 years of the franchise. And all of this, of course, was being done using 2D paper maps. We weren't messing with any of that 3D stuff back then.
Oof.
Eventually, our engine tech could handle the long draw distances, and Metropolis was fully realized here. This is the actual shot of the game.
Now, during the prototyping stage, it quickly became apparent how important weapons and gadgets are to the series. So Insomniac designed over 60...
Did I seriously just open this to hear you talk about Knack? It's just a slight detour because they brought up Mark Cerny. I'm not supposed to talk about Knack?
We figure, like, who wants to be restricted by physics when we could be turning enemies into rabbits or chickens or penguins?
So in November 2002, Ratchet was very innovative for its time, and was, of course, positively received, but we felt like we haven't really pushed it far enough. It's, to some degree, felt weapons optional, and it was like a platform game, but we wanted to really dive deeper into more of the RPG elements. We were just really kind of dipping our toes in the RPG waters.
And the story and characters need a lot of work too, because at the time, Insomniac was a baby.
What do you know about me?
Get the gold, get it out the door, and then hopefully get to make another.
Knack is back,
Ratchet
baby.
wasn't really a universe from a mythology perspective. The characters showed promise, but they didn't have a lot of depth. In fact, if you play the first game, you'll notice that Ratchet was kind of a jerk. He was too sarcastic, too snarky, too selfish. So for the next game, we recast Ratchet with James Arnold Taylor, and we rewrote him to be a kinder, more curious character with a sense of humor that
I've gone over all of this already, so I don't have a lot to say.
Didn't require putting others down. So thanks to that first Ratchet game, Insomniac learned a basic but important lesson. Make the time to develop your heroes and their relationships. Like in game design, it's very easy to get laser focused on the game because the natural inclination is to say, hey, we have to make the game work before anything else. But your audience is not going to care about your heroes if they don't care about their place in the world.
So over the next two sequels, we refined the franchise. Ongoing Commando, we fully embraced the weapons for our gameplay strategy and added RPG elements. We had a lot of variety in this game in the form of mega games.
When they say RPG elements, are they talking about upgrading weapons and nanotech?
Really let people test out their weapons and encourage people to buy weapons and try them out in these really cool spaces. We also had these new tiny planets that we called spherical worlds. This is actually something...
I love this. This is actually not from... He's talking about Going Commando. This is the one from Up Your Arsenal. This is Galtani Orbit or Galtani something. It's not as good as the ones from Ratchet and Clank 2, but I love those, and I wish they did more of them. They actually did sort of kind of reappropriate that style for Crack in Time. There are like extra mission planets you can find, but I feel like those are more locked to specific objectives, and the real untapped potential of these planets is just kind of like with Mario Galaxy, where they just sort of, you see maybe a gold bolt here, and then you plop Ratchet here, and then you just figure out how to get to here. And maybe there's 75 different ways of doing it. Maybe you jump in the lava and the bounce from the lava is enough. Or maybe, you go underground and into the hollow core of the thing, and then you can go up there. Maybe you redirect lasers to get... there's so many different ways of creating challenges like this. It's kind of like Captain Toad's treasure mapper. I forget the game's name, but just this... It's a very sort of raw... the objective, and now you just get to the objective. And I feel like, as much as I love these, they never quite delivered on the untapped potential of this. Insomniac did. Mario Galaxy got more mileage out of it, maybe.
So we saved that idea for this game. We had hover bike races and space combat missions, too.
Okay, we need to talk about hover bike races. This was fun, definitely fun. Wouldn't have minded seeing this in more Ratchet games. They actually cut a race sequence from the third game because they didn't have a lot of time to develop it because of the multiplayer and stuff like that. It just ate up a lot of time. Races. This is the best dogfighting. I think in any, obviously it's the best dogfighting in any Ratchet game, and it's really solid. Just dogfighting combat. It's really simplistic, but it's really fun. The one problem I do have with it is that the way the enemies are programmed is you can just fly on straight, and the enemies, they're programmed to sort of hover around your aiming reticule and then fly straight through it. So if you just don't move at all and you just keep shooting forwards, you'll eventually be able to clear them out. That is a problem. But that aside, this is really, really simplistic, but really good combat, I feel. And it's a shame that whenever they did more combat, they would do like an on-rail shooter and stuff like that. They would in Crack in Time, they actually flattened the terrain, so you were actually combating in 2-dimension, in a 2-dimension. It's just really weird. This absolutely deserves to be brought back. Especially also because there's so much more you could do with the ship upgrades that I don't think they really went into that well here. Imagine if you had a gadget in your ship that made it transparent, so that you could actually fly through a meteor or fly into a space station from the outside, and it would just last for maybe 10 or 5 seconds or whatever. And yeah, I think that would have been really cool, and it's a shame that they didn't bring this back and develop it further.
And space combat missions, too.
Now, players appreciated the huge leap forward in terms of gameplay depth and breadth. They also loved the double entendre of going commando, because not a lot of stylized franchises could be so subversive. So we decided to embrace that going forward, and another Ratchet and Clank tradition was born.
Yeah, when they pitched going commando to me, I didn't know what that meant. Sounds good, yeah, okay. Okay, so that leads us to, of course, Up Your Arsenal. Okay, so in that game, we introduced multiplayer, single-player battlefields, and our...
Okay. The multiplayer absolutely gutted the single-player game. The multiplayer was not necessary, and they shouldn't have made this. And the game really suffers from it. It's still a good game, but it's a lot of people's favorite Ratchet game. But I think that's largely nostalgia because the story is kind of funny, and it's very replayable. But I think that if people went back and played these games again, they would find that actually Ratchet 2 is the best one. And Ratchet 1, even though it's not as well optimized and it's a bit harder, it's much, much, much harder than these games became. I don't think Ratchet 3 holds up nearly as well as the first two.
Iconic villain of the series, Dr. Nefarious! He was inspired by old-school sci-fi B-movies and quickly became our most recognizable supervillain.
Yeah, and he also... This is another thing about Dr. Nefarious, and I'm sure I talked this to death in my Ratchet 3 stream, is that in Ratchet 1, it's Chairman Drac. And he's just like a money-grubbing little bureaucrat. And the games have a really sort of deep love of satirizing consumerism and big corporations and like these sorts of busybodies who just like love money. And you see it even in the second game where it's like everybody needs a protopad, and it's just like you see the advertisements and the prototypes that are attacking everybody, and they're still like trying to play it off as if this is just a good thing. But then the third game comes, and Dr. Nefarious is all about like robots are being oppressed and everybody should be a robot, and I'm going to turn everyone into a robot. It's like sort of a weird racial allegory, which doesn't really make sense because that's not what any of the rest of the game is about, right? Because they still have Clank and like the Secret Agent Clank thing. That's a much more interesting, I think, sort of little story in that game about, again, consumerism and about like the distorting presentation of realities from the infobot to the first game. In the first game where you met the zany characters and they were all like really down to earth and boring. Likewise, the Secret Agent Clank, it's just like so fictionalized and stylized in comparison to what the rest of the game is like. But then they bring this weird sort of racial narrative into the game and they don't really deliver on it in any way. And what's so weird is that when they bring Dr. Nefarious back in Crack in Time, they don't touch on it again. Even though the future series is all about Ratchet being the last Lombax, who are like this race of magical superhuman aliens. And about Alistair Azimuth, you know, the two of them, like, Ratchet has like this father figure, and the father figure wants to use the time machine to bring the Lombaxes back, and Ratchet is like, no, we shouldn't use the time machine. And Dr. Nefarious, like, in a game that actually has this sort of story going on about like this lost race, Dr. Nefarious, whose whole gimmick was racial supremacy, he just doesn't do that again. And it is so weird. Anyways.
Was a huge hit with players.
And like I know like these are games for kids too. I get that, but it's still I don't think it's unreasonable to expect them to deliver on these themes if they're the ones who are bringing it up. I would have been totally fine if Dr. Nefarious was just another, you know, money-hungry little bureaucrat. But I think because they went this way, but only kind of half did it, it just comes across as really weird when you look at the entire lineup. Even Gleeman Vox from Ratchet Gladiator, or Deadlocked in America, as like a take on corrupt news agency / wrestle promoter. It's like, again, he's a lot more in line with the villains of the early Ratchet games than Dr. Nefarious is.
Critics.
So that's what Nefarious' goals were in the older games? He was just a nobody bad guy in Crack. Yeah, exactly.
Looking back, there were a lot of key elements that made it successful. Ratchet and Clank had a textured relationship. They bantered, they disagreed, but you could always tell these guys were buddies. We had outrageous weapons with badass upgrades. There were gadgets and planet hopping. We had tons of Captain Quark. The visuals were stylized with rich detail and a vibrant palette. They had a Douglas Adams-inspired humor that I love so much, and a great balance of platforming to shooting.
But yet this was around this time where we suddenly started to see mascot characters like fading away, or they were kind of putting on the back shelf until later. And characters.
Okay, so they're going to talk about now, I imagine, why Ratchet endured. And there's something that needs to be noted here, specifically in the examples that they're giving, is that none of these mascots died organically. Banjo-Kazooie died because Microsoft didn't give them the go-ahead to make another Banjo-Kazooie. Banjo-Kazooie, like, this is not a franchise. Like, if they made another one now, it would make money. It would have always made money. But then they did, like, nuts and bolts. And it's just like, why are you taking this weird, like, just make... people wanted a Banjo-Kazooie game. Stop this nonsense and just make that. So this died because of corporate mismanagement. This thing... and this thing died because they kept changing hands and developers kept trying to amp it up. Like, oh my god, we need a gimmick. What's a gimmick that sells the Crash game to the kids these days? And because they sort of fumbled the transition into the 6th generation when we got more standardized camera control setups and we actually knew how to develop for 3D games, and these games never developed a real identity for the 6th generation. Crash to Insanity was the way this series was supposed to go, but it was not finished. It released really buggy, and it was kind of a mess. It's a masterpiece, but it's a mess. And this is just another corporate mismanagement. Sonic, again, corporate mismanagement, all the way down the line. So the reason Ratchet endured, I don't know what he's going to say, the reason Ratchet endured is because Insomniac didn't go for that nonsense. Insomniac just kept making pretty well-rounded, well-made Ratchet games. And oh my god, it turns out when you don't screw up the series and you don't allow these idiot marketing gurus to come in and try to revamp things every 2 years, it actually just doesn't die. So no, sort of mascot platformers did not die because gamers didn't want them. They died because of corporate mismanagement.
But yet this was around this time where we suddenly started to
Let's see what his excuse is.
see mascot characters like fading away, or they were kind of putting on the back shelf until later. And they started going to hibernation. But we believe that part of the reason why the Ratchet and Clank series endured was that we dramatically evolved it. We transformed it from being a platformer with shooting to a shooter with platforming.
Okay.
So
I can see where he's going with that.
Receptive to the guns, and we've really integrated that.
But like, this is also something I don't like about the future series, is that what made Ratchet 2 really good was the inclusion of strafing, and because you have strafing, you can now keep firing without losing any of the tightness in the platforming. So the combat actually incorporates the platforming really deeply, because you have slow-moving projectiles and you have little enemies that run at you, and it's like positioning and maneuvering is really integral to good combat in that game. So it's still at its heart very much a platformer. And when they locked the aiming reticule to the front of the camera, I do believe they kind of fumbled the bag on the platforming itself, and I think the levels suffered for it, and I think the games suffered for it. So I don't think his analysis is quite on here. And like, if this is the case, I mean, why did Jak and Daxter die? Right? Jak and Daxter was also a platformer that integrated much deeper into being a shooter game with platforming, but that didn't survive.
Third game, we had full circle strafing with R1 trigger and really made this into a modern day.
It was not R1, it was L2 and R2. R1 was used to crouch, and I think L1 was used to enter first person mode. Or, yeah, I think so. I think R1 was used to like activate the helicopter also, if you wanted to like do long jumps and stuff. But maybe I'm pretty sure the L2, R2 buttons were used to strafe.
Third person shooter in terms of mechanics. So the big lesson here was we really had to adapt or die. It's really important to listen to what players want to play, but then of course you're having to watch the market trends and learn what other games are doing. But then you
fact checked live. I've probably played these games more than he has. I think it was also the fact that Ratchet already was a third-person shooter. Those were big after the character platformers. You're definitely right about the corporal mismanagement, though. Yeah. I think that's really fair, though. Is that Ratchet really had embedded in its core seeds that they could just grow so that Ratchet could still remain relevant in the changing media landscape. Find it hilarious that every management team goes surprise Pikachu face when a franchise which doesn't screw up actually keeps enduring. Yeah! Hey, guys, this is what I'm talking about. Don't bring in Jim Ryan from business school. Like, Iwata, when he took over Nintendo, his prerogative was not, what we really need is to make Mario a first-person multiplayer shooter to compete with Call of Duty. He was like, no, we just keep making quality Mario games and we keep making Pokemon games. And it's like, we don't abandon our flagship core titles just because trends change. And there's kind of a lesson in that trends are transient, but quality is permanent. People will always remember Silent Hill 1, but, Silent Hill 1 was not following on a lot of trends. Not nearly as much as something like maybe Silent Hill Downpouring was. That's maybe not a perfect analogy, but you know what I mean. Where if it's like Demon's Souls was not following a trend. And it's going to endure a lot more than almost every game that is following a trend.
You also want to amplify what's great about your own game and what makes it stand out. So there's definitely a tricky balance there. So we really thought we'd hit our stride with Up Your Arsenal, but we started to face a small obstacle here. And that is the fourth game slump. So really what that is that this happens all the time with movies and trilogies where you feel like you've said all that you could say with the third game, you nail it, and you're like, oh, people want more, we have the opportunity to make another game if you want to play, but what do we do? So,
look, I really respect them for making Ratchet Gladiator just like, hey, let's go in a completely different direction. Let's change all of the fundamentals and make something completely wild. And I do love that game, and I'm going to stream it in December or January whenever I have the time to. But they could have just done another game in the mold of Ratchet 2. I think that would have been fine.
Again, it's like that rule of threes. And
only sad thing about Iwata is that the marketing of the Wii U was so bad, it single-handedly ruined the console. It was an idea ahead of its time. Yeah. So the idea with the Wii, the original Wii, was that the two eyes are two human beings. And it's like the two of us, we. But Wii U, it's like, it's also you. Because now you have the monitor in your hand. And it's like, guys, nobody, these esoteric marketing ideas probably sound really clever to you. But did you do any testing before you rolled it out? I also just think that I don't think that the sort of casual gaming audience of the Wii was really looking for another console at that time. I think they were happy with the Wii, and your grandma would buy a Wii, but your grandma's not going to buy a Wii U. It's just too much complex setup, and then they tried to do like multiplayer stuff too, but it was so poorly optimized. A really tragic console. But I think, like with the PlayStation 3, where because the console really sucks, you have to make the games land. And I think Sony did that with the PlayStation 3, and I think Nintendo did that with the Wii U, and I think a lot of the Switch is a genius marketing concept. It's cool. You like see somebody has a Switch, and like when the Switch rolled out, it was just a cool thing to own. But I think a lot of the Switch's success that people don't talk about often enough is that Nintendo built up a lot of goodwill when they made the Wii U. A lot of their core audience was actually excited about more Nintendo titles because they had been delivering on quality games. Wii 3. I still revisit Gladiator for the co-op. Oh yeah. I never really played the co-op. I think I played the offline multiplayer co-op with my sister for Ratchet and Clank 3 one time, but I was just much better at the game than she was, so I kicked her ass in it. Wii U failed for a lot of reasons, yeah. More than half of the Switch's flagships are Wii U ports. That's true.
We were concerned, too, that we'd made these 3 games back 1 year after the next. And what do people want with a 4th game? Are they starting to get tired? And is there some level of franchise fatigue happening here?
I also don't really agree with the fact that audiences are growing tired. I think maybe reviewers grow tired, but I distinctly remember when I first saw the trailer for Ratchet Gladiator when I was young. I remember seeing that game and being like, whoa, more Ratchet and Clank. And I would have taken anything they would have given me. And I actually think that size matters. Like, that game it really suffers from being developed for the PSP. But that is a much more interesting concept. And if you wanted to go into the route of like, how do we continue making games after the original trilogy, do weird sort of sci-fi plots. Right? Like, Crack in Time, whether or not the presentation, I don't fully love it, but I love that gimmick of you're going back in time and you're like changing the maps dynamically in the future. And like, remember how everybody talked about Skyward Sword having that dungeon that did that, and oh my god, how revolutionary. But Ratchet did it first. Crack in Time already did it, and it did it much better. Size matters, having like size alteration be a core mechanic. That stuff I think was really cool. I love the level where we go inside of Clank and we have to repair him from the inside. I'm thinking I need to step up. I need to step away from the video for 1 minute. I'm just going to get some water. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. But yeah, so I think that it's probably the developers are more so the ones that were fatigued, more so than the general gaming audience. Because I would have taken anything they gave me with a Ratchet name at that point.
So the question was, well, maybe we need to adapt further. Maybe with Up Your Arsenal, we made it a third-person, modern shooter, but how can we take this even further? And we were looking at other games that were really big. We were looking at, I don't know, your GTAs and stuff like that. And we had a little bit of envy, like, oh, what can we do there? So at the time, for us, it was Halo. I know. So in 2005, we went dark.
Now, right off the bat, you're going to notice that we dropped the double entendre. We even took Clank's name off the title. In hindsight, we got to acknowledge that was kind of not cool. Now, while other co-op multiplayer features were strong, it was still a big departure from the franchise. We removed fan favorite Captain Quark. We sidelined Clank.
Just now realized how long ago Crack in Time was released. 14 years. We're getting old, baby! Sorry if that was loud. Yeah, we're getting really old. COVID messed up everybody's perception of time, didn't it? Huh? I feel like it should still be 2018. I don't feel like I ever truly left 2018.
Clank, and lost the exploration factor. Instead, we sent Ratchet to various planets simply to survive a Running Man-style game show. It was a fun game, just not a Ratchet and Clank game, and definitely falls into the what were we thinking category of the franchise.
So, co-op was...
Size Matters was developed by High Impact. I love that game, but I question how much info and help they had past playing the Ratchet games themselves and adapting it for what kind of games they make. I think that's fair. It definitely feels like a lot of the characterizations are a bit off. I think that it's been probably, at least 15 years or something since I last played that game. But, yeah, I feel like I would probably have something to say about the way the characters are communicated in that game. I maybe feel kind of naive or something. I don't fully remember.
Very well received, and the game was a commercial success, but the reviews were not as favorable. Deadlock received lower than expected scores, and even one reviewer called it soulless gun porn, which that hurt. That's cold.
Oof.
At the time, we had 3 huge successes behind us. We thought we could not fail.
Now, looking back at the checklist that made Up Your Arsenal successful, it's easy to see why this was sort of a misstep for us. We had no engaging buddy story, our customizable weapon feature resulted in reduced personality, planetary exploration was gone, Quark was left out of the fun, the color palette was muted, and we went overboard with the shooting.
Okay, so let's... buddy story with heart. I mean... I think that's fair. I think like you said, they dropped Clank's name from the title. I think that you need the sort of heartful buddy story to make a Ratchet and Clank game work. I think this is a good analysis. Imaginative and strategic weapons. Yeah, and you can't even customize where the weapons go on your quick select. I think this is good. Planetary exploration. Oh yes, this was terrible. Captain Quark. I mean, he's in the game as a fun little cameo at the end. I don't think you need Captain Quark. I like Captain Quark, but I think Captain Quark really works best when... I think with the third game, Captain Quark has done enough. You gave him a big sort of redemption game that he's a huge part of, and I think that's enough. I'd prefer it if Captain Quark's involvement, if he has to continue going on in these games, is just keep it to a minimum. Maybe you meet him in 1 or 2 planets, but... you don't need to incorporate him very deeply into the plot, because I feel like he just sort of undermines the heroes, and I don't think he really adds that much. So I don't... fans complained, but stylized rich detail and vibrant visuals. Oh my god, yes. This game is the ugliest Ratchet game. Douglas Adams-inspired humor. Douglas Adams. Who is this guy? Is this Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Oh, yeah. He is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Okay, yeah. I mean, it's there, but it's so much more channeled through the newscasters, Juanita and the alien guy, that I don't really... I don't think of Ratchet Deadlocked as a particularly funny game. Shooter, platforming balance, oh my god, yes. This game, you don't even have Clank in your back. You don't have jet boots or anything. Oh, you have jet boots that sort of let you go faster, but you can't fly or anything like that. So, yeah, they really lost out on that. And that hurts. It hurts the level design. And the level design just becomes these big arenas. And if you just want a fun sort of what did he say? Gun porn. If you just want a fun sort of gun porn arena fighter, this is really fun, right? I can sit down and play this game for 4 hours and just fry out my dopamine receptors because this is a really fun game. But it's not a game that I go back to all that often because, you know, it's a Ratchet game. It's not a Ratchet & Clank game. Never played a Ratchet & Clank game. Worth it to pick up now. I've thought about getting the newest one. The thing about Ratchet & Clank is that if you have access to the original games, they hold up amazingly well. Like, the first one is kind of hard, but other than that, these games have aged amazingly well. Quark is like their patches. Yeah, kind of. Yeah, anyways, I think this is a fine analysis.
We even covered Ratchet's face for the majority of the game.
Yes.
Insomniac tried to make the game different, but in doing so, we swung the needle just a bit too far. It was clear that we had just deviated too far from the franchise DNA. Okay, so what do we mean when we say franchise DNA? These are the core pillars of the game from both a gameplay and lore perspective. No matter what you change from game to game, this is the stuff that stays constant so that each entry feels like it was made by a singular voice. It's one of those things you don't really think about until you see it done poorly, and then when it's done poorly, it really stands out.
So we knew we had to return to what made previous games great, but also face a new challenge on the horizon, which was the PlayStation 3. For this new platform, we needed to overhaul our engine and our tools. This meant we needed to build everything from the ground up. We couldn't reuse any of our characters, any of our sounds, any of our assets.
It's funny that they have the Spider-Man font here, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man font on the PlayStation 3 itself. This is a much nicer, much nicer font. Staple this on the PlayStation, why don't you? Stamp that on.
Everything. So this was a big technology upheaval for us. This is common to most franchises that span multiple platforms. Anyone, of course, who's worked in the industry for a few years knows this happens quite a bit, where you have to kind of do a retooling. We had promised with Tools of Destruction, though, that we were going to make this CG animated movie, or it was going to feel like you could play a CG animated movie. And I started getting really caught up in the allure of what the PlayStation 3 could do. And I was thinking about, maybe there could be like procedural worlds, or we could have multiplayer modes. We could have this like open space exploration. And I started like chatting about this in one of the design meetings. And a team member walked up to the whiteboard and wrote in giant letters, "Technology is evil." And so he was coming from having worked on our other PlayStation 3 game, which was a launch title, which was Resistance: Fall of Man. And that game had a ton of ambitious systems. We had like procedural glass and cloth and like hoses.
You love the Spider-Man font? Oh my god.
We managed to get glass into that game. But everything else,
imagine being this guy?
Because in the end, you have to really be careful when you're starting with new tech. It can be a lot of rope that you end up hanging yourselves with.
The glass was great, though.
The glass was great, yeah. So given that we had to rewrite our new engine and tools, this meant a smaller scope. So we had fewer cinematics just because of the higher fidelity animation. There was no multiplayer or co-op, no spherical worlds, and no fun stuff like racing or other special modes. We had to really go lean on this one. So we were wondering, how do we please longtime fans if the graphics were taking a step forward and our gameplay and story breadth was taking a step back? We need to go lean and deep on our franchise DNA, but where to start? So the answer for us was to tell a tightly told story about Ratchet and Clank's origins. Rather than following the fly-by-the-seat-of-our-pants approach as we did with our previous games, we need to start thinking about world building. That's what we brought on TJ.
I've been working on games for...
Oh my god, it is his fault. I joked earlier, but he's responsible.
Resistance: Fall of Man. And I also come out to LA at the time to build up a writing career, but I'd never written a video game before. I was coming on board several months into production. And one of my chief duties was to take the sort of loose mythology of Ratchet and Clank and work with this guy and Brian Hastings to build out a unified lore that could inform future games, as well as comics and movies. Around this time, stories were starting to matter more in the gaming space, so we really knew that we had to step it up. We had a great set of characters and planets, but the original lore was done 100% on the fly and had to be tied down so that we could...
no, brother, it didn't. Yeah.
Here's a horrifying list of things that we did not have the answers to. Who is Ratchet?
Simple, right?
Beyond just guns and wisecracks. Like, believe it or not, like, we didn't know. We knew there's surfacey stuff, like what made him fun, but what about all the writery stuff that I like to talk about to make programmers' eyes glaze over? What...
Oh my god, this guy came in there and he was like, let's overthink everything.
Drives him? What's he afraid of? Like, I love that Ratchet was a wide-eyed engineer who prioritized fun and thrills over basic safety protocol, but the earlier games never really explored why. And to me...
Ratchet is Luke Skywalker, but if Luke Skywalker was Han Solo. I think that's a fine way to look at it. He's like the adventurous main protagonist, but he's also Han Solo.
Ratchet is constantly struggling with his identity because he was born an orphan and the only Lombax as far as he knew. So his need to
We literally meet a Lombax in the second game, brother.
invent came from his need to feel like he had an impact on the universe. Building on this vulnerability helped us create a more textured character that players could relate to. Where are the Lombaxes? I would love to tell you all that we had this mapped out in a Bible, like an under lock and key in the Insomniac vault, but we had no idea. It was white space at the time. Fans were dying to know what happened to the other Lombaxes, and we wanted to address.
Were they? Like, again, there was a Lombax in the second game. Who was waiting to look what happened to the Lombaxes? Nobody.
This in the new trilogy. Who is Clank? The original game featured him as a factory defect that escaped the junk heap, but over the course of 4 games, the studio felt like there had to be more to him.
Okay. Bad Impulse, him being a defect is more interesting. And like that 20-second meeting he has with his mother near the end, I think it's on Quart 2, near the end of Ratchet 1, there's more emotion packed into those 20 seconds than in the entire Zony Father Time Lord narrative. They really overthought things.
Come up with a reveal for him that would shed new light on his origins without hopefully feeling too retconned. And during one of our brainstorming meetings on Tool of Destruction, the team was very excited about time manipulation as a mechanic. So we developed a connection between Clank and a faction of time-bending creatures called the Zoni. And at the time, I had a vague idea of how he was connected to them, but felt that this could tee up a compelling origin story to be revealed in a future game. And there was so much more we didn't know. These are all questions fans wanted the answers to. And even though we're going...
Okay, who is Angela Cross? She's a Lombax. How many factions are there? See, this is also... I feel like I'm going to probably learn to hate this guy. This question, I feel, only serves to limit the creative scope of the license, which had gotten so much mileage so far out of just, oh yeah, go to the Bogon galaxy. It's a different galaxy with its own corporation and its own evil factions, and it's like, when you try to lock that stuff down, you make it harder to add to the universe. And you shouldn't do that, because these games are not that serious. How do they get along, the different factions? Again, it depends on the game. Don't overthink it. Who invented that weapon and on what planet? The point of who invented the weapon is the gigantic megacorporations did it. And these are just huge companies, and they just do whatever. And, hey, people want to buy weapons, sure, we'll sell them. We'll sell them in vending machines. And it's like, hey, it's the same thing as like they faced with Ratchet Gladiator, or with the marketing of the Wii U, where it's like, you guys want to maybe think this a bit further? Are all robots sentient or just Clank? All of them are. That had been the entire protocol throughout the entire thing. With the possible exceptions of like drone AI controlled idiot and enemy bots, but like the bots in the first game were mostly like Darla Cratch. In the second game, we had the enforcer who runs away on Endico, Dr. Nefarious's butler, Courtney Gears. Oh, they had always been sentient, and the whole point of Ratchet 3 was that Nefarious believed robots were superior. He wouldn't think they were superior if they weren't sentient. So it's like, hey, what is this ridiculous question doing here? What forms of governments are there in place? Who cares? Who cares about that? That doesn't matter. This is kind of like that, I love George R.R. Martin, but he has this insane quote where he talks about Aragorn comes to power, and then it's a happily ever after. But nobody asks what happens after Aragorn becomes king. What's his tax policy like? And it's like, what are you talking about? Who the hell cares what his tax policy is like? What kind of soulless, materialist monster are you that you even care about stuff like that? This was never a relevant question in this license, and it's just like, yeah, there was a president in the third game. Where is Sasha? Yeah, she's probably just like with the Starship Phoenix or whatever. That's where we left her in Ratchet Gladiator. A robot sentient, or is Clank the only one? Like, why are you... He's doubling up on questions here. What's under Quark's mask? His face. He has a mask on because it's a funny joke that you never see his face. Did Ratchet and Sasha ever date? Maybe. What's Quark's first name? Cornelius. You made it Cornelius. What's up with the plumber? The plumber is a Super Mario reference because he's a plumber, and he talks about plumbers don't go jumping down into strange pipes, and that's the joke. Is that he's just this weird character that shows up from time to time. This really smells of, I come from a school where we're taught to overthink things and really flesh stuff out. And that's such a bad approach to take to this license, I feel.
To a new galaxy in the future saga, I had to start compiling a franchise Bible so that every team had a place to start. And I had to get started halfway through production when all our sets were built, our characters were modeled, levels were already locked down. So this was truly trial by fire for a first-time game writer.
I like to throw people into the frying pan.
Yes, you do. And once we hit alpha, it became very clear that we didn't have the time or the resources to answer everything. So I had to prioritize while laying the groundwork for the next game. That way fans could feel secure knowing
and look,
we're coming.
I don't hate the stories they came up with. That's not the problem. Just like I said earlier, if this had been its own license that was just like a spiritual sequel to Ratchet and Clank, controlled very similarly, very similar layout, like plays very similarly, you have like the gun vendors and all that. You have an alien who has a robot on his back that lets him maneuver faster or whatever. Like, if this was its own thing, I think I could have really dug it. But it's built on the back of the legacy of games I consider to be much better than what they did here. And that made it impossible for me to really get into it. I know, like, a Ratchet and Clank purist, I know you guys probably think that's really cool, to be a purist about something like this. But, it's something I care about.
To call these mythology branches, fleshing out your world with details that serve as flavor in one game, but can be a full meal in the next. So the Zoni, Terracnoid Stages, the Court of Azimuth, as well as other terms that might sound like gobbledygook if you haven't played the series, these concepts were seeded in Tools of Destruction without knowing exactly how they would be used going forward. But when we paid it off, it provided a sense of continuity and the illusion of a plan that I definitely did not have. Cheers.
I thought he had a plan.
Yeah, no.
He started his presentation by talking about they just made stuff up on the fly and they didn't really have a plan for any of it. And now he's ending like, I had to write all of this on the fly because the game was already deep in development. And I just had to lay these seeds for stuff that I didn't know I was going to pay off. Like, this guy, what a hack.
So what do we learn from all this? If
Good night, Adak.
The audience will engage with and comb over every crumb of lore they're offered. It's the double-edged sword of good mythology.
That's actually really true.
Cracks and continuity errors. They'll create fan-made wikis to point out every consistency. So keep in mind, make sure not to define heroes by a game mechanic. Find something emotional and relatable about them, something that they're missing. Audiences want to see themselves in their heroes. And that's going to give your character the kind of depth you'll need to carry them over the next 2 or 3, or in our case, 7 games. White space is okay, but nail down the critical aspects of your lore. Use mythology branches to tee up a larger world. Be specific about those aspects. No ambiguity, because ambiguity can oftentimes read like plot holes or an unsure writer.
I think this is all fine, but like, this is just general good writing advice. I don't know.
And consider whatever you write law going forward. Write for the hardcore gamer. When you're deep in crunch, it's very easy to say people won't notice. But the hardcore do. I promise you, they always do. They will YouTube it, they will wiki it, they will tweet it at you angrily, they will evangelize or eviscerate your work. I've had both done, and
hello, guys.
I can give you a guess as to which one is better. Putting in the work benefits not only the team, but future partners and ancillary products based on your series.
So by doing all that work and defining the mythology, it just gave us a great foundation for building these worlds and adventures that are for our upcoming trilogy. But as new designers joined the team, we realized we could not solely rely on oral tradition. Over the 6 years, we had people leaving, coming in, new designers, and so we had to start figuring out how do we develop a Ratchet and Clank and standardize our process. One thing that came up, which was kind of wild, was we had these crate stacks, and for a lot of us working on the early game, some of this was pretty intuitive on how to place them. But some of our new designers would either put these giant stacks and people just start getting tired of pressing the square button, like hitting all of those crates, or they'd have very sparse stacks that wouldn't quite be stacked correctly. So Brian Hastings, our creative officer, actually wrote a 4-page document on how to stack crates.
Okay. This might be the most interesting thing I've heard all year. Show me the document. Show me the 4-page document about how to properly stack crates.
The subtle art of craft.
I know, yeah. It was pretty in-depth. It was impressive. So, of course...
No! Show me the document! Brian Hastings stacking crates. I'm teeing this up for myself later. Maybe I'll make a video of this if I find it.
How to design great weapons. On Deadlock, we had this really cool feature, which was you could create customizable weapons in various combinations, but they started to kind of lose a little bit of their soul and personality. So we thought, well, what are some general guidelines or goals that we could use while brainstorming weapons? And so we threw out 3. One is they had to be comedic, strategic, or spectacle, and they had to hit a 10 in one of those categories. And so this actually helped us in developing one of our favorite weapons, Mr. Zircon.
I hate Mr. Zircon. It really hurts me to hear that he's one of their favorites. And like I figure they've put him in a lot of games. But I hate Mr. Zircon.
Where originally he was designed as being a synthenoid, which was a character we'd had in earlier games where it was like fire and forget.
Common Aesir L. No crate stacking for you. I will personally find... Okay, I'm gonna... Drafted a 4-page document. Unusual as it sounds, matching up crates releases a sure precision. Okay, so there's a lot of articles talking about this. I'm gonna see if I can't just find the documents, and if I can't, I'm gonna message Brian Hastings himself to get him to send me the document. The bastards.
We started building this character, and he looked like one of these.
Or I'm going to go back and play all of these games, and I'm gonna reverse engineer the document from the way they did it.
Bots on the left here and had very little personality.
I'll come back to you in 5 months.
No strategy here. It's not really much spectacle, but we can certainly push it in terms of the comedy factor. So I asked the art team if we could give him a mouth. I walked over to TJ. I'm like, hey, we got this guy named Mr. Zircon. He speaks in the third person. Go.
This is not the kind of request you want to get during crunch time. But I understood Brian's vision. I agree with him that it was important. So I came up with what, in hindsight, looked on paper to be the dumbest idea for a character ever. I wondered if Mr. Zircon loved to talk trash, but just happened to be really terrible at it. He thought everything around him was stupid. He had no inflection in his voice, and he lived only to kill what was around him. So in a couple days, I whipped up 400 lines of VO. And
Basically, got here now, but this seems a rather narrow notion of storytelling. For example, conceiving of the protagonist as necessary as self-interest seems unnecessarily limiting, even if the medium of games isn't best suited for a radical break between protagonist and player. Yeah, like I said, I don't object to them developing a sort of Bible for how to do this after Gladiator or Deadlocked. It makes a lot of sense that they would want to do that, but a lot of these were just like... You're throwing your anchor down where you don't need to, and you're making it unnecessarily difficult for yourself to develop these games moving forwards.
I took it to the team, and they looked at me like I was insane. But when we recorded it, got into the game and balanced it, it worked, and it became one of the most iconic character gadgets in Ratchet and Clank history.
Yeah, I think it's all because we had those goals early on how to push all these weapons and bring them up to a 10. So, one of the weapons that was a big favorite, of course, was the Groovitron, which was a weapon that makes enemies dance.
I also hate this.
It's interesting when we started to have that.
See, the thing about Mr. Zircon, and this is, I'm going to mansplain here to Brian Algeir. I'm going to mansplain a bit here to him. Mr. Zircon and the Groovitron suck for the same reason, and that is that they decouple the platforming from the combat completely. And the platforming intensive combat is the central feature of this license. So something like the chicken morph gun in Ratchet 1, that actually is not just like the greatness of that weapon is not that it's funny. The greatness of the weapon is that it is so skill intensive because you need to really be strong on the platforming. But you also need to be good at avoiding enemies while also kind of maintaining the direction of Ratchet to face them so that you can continue to transform them. And weapons like the Mind Glove in Ratchet 2 work the exact same way, where the better you are at positioning and platforming, the more power this weapon the more you can unlock the power of this weapon. Whereas trash like the Groovitron and Mr. Zircon, they just, like, this is not combat anymore. And I understand that, maybe some people don't care for the platforming combat, but that is what I think is the greatest strength of these games. And it's kind of disheartening listening to them celebrate these features that I think have no place being in these games.
evaluating our weapons, we looked back at this weapon and we realized why it was so successful. It actually hit all 3 of those goals. It was hilarious. It also had this big spectacle with all these beams coming out, all these enemies dancing, and it was a very strategic weapon. You could toss it out, and it was like an AoE stun weapon.
It's why also I don't love the shield in Ratchet 2 and 3. I don't love the laser beam Clank can do in Ratchet 2. I don't love the Zodiac from Ratchet 2. I don't love the Rhino from basically any of these games. I think it's always a bit too overpowered. But things like the lava gun in Ratchet 2. I love the lava gun in both of its iterations. Even when it's fully upgraded, I still think that's one of the better weapons. But the problem with it is that the lava gun unupgraded is much more fun to use. And because again, it's so deeply ingraining, like it's just this continuous flow of lava out of a gun. And it's so fun to use while incorporating all the funny platforming and, all the fun platforming. That's what made it great. And the upgraded meteor gun, that's also fun, but it's not as fun.
So as part of our return to form on Tools of Destruction, of course, we brought back one of our signature levels, which was Metropolis or Lero City. And this time it was featured in stunning detail with enemy fire raining down. Ratchet & Clank Tools of Destruction was a big hit with fans. It was often praised as looking like a Pixar film and hit all of the key ingredients of our DNA. In terms of story, it both answered and raised many questions about Ratchet & Clank's origins.
But the game's cliffhanger ending left people feeling a bit cheated. And if I was to do it over again, I
Pixar quality.
probably would not have done it. Sure, cliffhangers can be appealing, and I think used appropriately, they're an effective way of retaining audience interest, but I think oftentimes it just ends up leaving players feeling frustrated.
Yeah, essentially, Clank got abducted by the Zoni, and nobody knew what happened to him. So players were left hanging with this question. And we really wanted to address this cliffhanger, but our problem was that the next game was going to be in a couple of years, and we didn't know if people could wait that long. But fortunately, we received both a blessing and a curse in the form of it's my fancy PowerPoint transition there, development curveballs. And so all projects face these where out of the blue, there's a particular request, the publisher asks for something, or some tech change happens. And during Tools of Destruction, what happened with us was we originally wanted to do a co-op, have a co-op feature, and be able to play the campaign with a split screen or potentially online.
Why did you want that?
We talked to Sony about this, we promised it, and then about midway through, I think we were like, yeah, that's not going to happen, sorry. So the deal we ended up making was like, well, now we'll make a smaller product instead, and would come out in 2008 between Tools of Destruction and A Crack in Time, which was the next big installment. So, that was DLC at the time. It was like this brand new concept, and we were pretty excited about working on this, but unfortunately it would eat a lot into our pre-production time. So for a while we had a bit of a freak out moment, and we realized, though, that we could turn this obstacle into an opportunity. With a smaller game, we could experiment with new ideas and new mechanics, and they could potentially lead into future games. And one idea that was starting to gain traction was doing this 2D space combat game that was similar to Geometry Wars, because that was kind of the flavor of the month. But then we thought, well, we've got this cliffhanger, we kind of want to continue Ratchet & Clank story.
Why was this an idea?
Hate mail, so maybe we should, focus more on the story. And the one thing we really loved about the previous game that we wanted to do was Space Pirates. I mean, those are just awesome. And so that's how Quest for Booty was born. It's actually...
I think the Space Pirates, if you play Ratchet 3, when one of the Wit comics, the narrator's going over it, and he's like, Captain Quark was attacked by... Oh, come on. Really? robotic pirate ghosts. But then they actually just made them robotic pirate ghosts in subsequent games. And again, this is a fun concept, but Ratchet, really?
The title that we originally wanted to come with Tools of Destruction, but it worked much better for this smaller pirate-based game. And we really loved pirates at the time. We actually started to decorate the office with pirate flags. We had pirate skulls. We felt like the little band off in the corner making this crazy little experimental game. But we could leverage all of the stuff we had from Tools of Destruction, but this also gave us the opportunity to start experimenting. And we came up with this idea for this wrench tether gadget where the head of the wrench would detach and latch onto bolts, and you could kind of pull them down. It was really a new concept for platforming and puzzles. You could also pick up flaming lava rocks with it and throw them off of grind rails. And we had this really cool open island.
I feel like that's a bad utilization of that, because you've already just let the player shoot stuff. You don't need to add extra layers of complexity to it. But yeah.
Really explore with these.
And the wrench detachable object. This is just the dynamo, which they incorporated into the slingshot or the hyper shot in Ratchet 3. So it's like, this isn't really new. It's just like a universal object environmental variable changer.
We also had several NPCs that Ratchet could talk to and experiment with conversation trees. We want to see how far we can get pushing features that you often find in RPG-style adventure games. Now, to address the cliffhanger, we use this game as an opportunity to reveal the identity of the villain who kidnapped Clank. We use Dr. Nefarious. Fans have been clamoring for his return ever since Up Your Arsenal, and bringing him back felt like a great way to build out our universe, which now spans something like 3 galaxies.
So we saw a lot of positives with this project. We developed, of course, the new wrench mechanic. It was like one of our biggest returns on investment, even though that investment was pretty small. It's cool to see that it's still making money. And it was, for me, actually one of the most enjoyable games to work on, given its small scope. It had much fewer headaches. In terms of, in terms of negatives, our Metacritic was actually one of the lowest ones I think Insomniac ever got, which was 75 at the time. It was 3 to 4 hours long. People complained about the length, no weapon upgrades, there was no quark. And then we had this teapot matter, which I like to call Teapot Gate.
Yeah. At one point in the game, like, you're traveling around this level that I believe we called Morrow Caverns with a decapitated space pirate's head on a stick. And he would walk around, he would talk as you're walking from room to room, and I thought it would be funny if he just sang "I'm a little teapot" in order to open one of the doors. It was just one of those like dumb, funny jokes that you throw in without thinking a lot about it. It turns out someone actually owns the rights to "I'm a little teapot," and that person has lawyers.
Oh my God.
They got involved and it actually became Teapot Gate. So the bonus tip here is don't ever assume that a nursery rhyme is public domain.
I was actually thinking of playing the clip, but you probably shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
I didn't know about this.
Okay, so for that game, we adopted this why not mindset. We really wanted to turn our curveball into an opportunity, and we felt like we did. It gave us a chance to really flesh out our universe. It really helps, experimentation we find helps lead to future breakthroughs, and you really need to kind of do these on the heels of a success. Had we done this after Deadlock, that probably would not have been a wise choice. Of course, smaller, cheaper games have lower stakes as well. So for our next game, it was Ratchet and Clank Future: A Crack in Time.
A Crack in Time was my favorite, and it's still available at Hollow Game stores everywhere.
Thanks for the plug.
So we had less than a year to make our biggest PlayStation 3 game because Quest for Booty, again, ate up a lot of our pre-production time. We really wanted this game to be great because we started to think that this was probably going to be the end of the trilogy, if not the franchise, and it was going to be our last and best Ratchet and Clank.
At the start of the game, we revealed that Clank had been taken by the Zoni to the Grey Clock, which had fallen under the control of Dr. Nefarious. We pulled the curtain back on Clank's origins, explaining his connection to the Zoni as heir apparent to the station. Rather than just being a defect, we revealed that Clank was destined to watch over the flow of time, and I hadn't even started watching Doctor Who yet, folks. Yeah.
You don't need to give every character a magical destiny. It's actually just fine that he was a defect.
We had Charles Martinet voice him, and
okay, actually, that is kind of fun though that they got Charles Martinet to voice him.
Was definitely a career highlight for me. I'm happy we don't have a picture of when I met him because you would absolutely be able to tell from the look on his face that it was a career highlight for me.
So Clank's story led us to develop a lot of special time puzzles where players could play and record multiple.
Why are his
pastels
pastels all drunk?
Puzzles. From our open world layout experimentation that we did in Quest for Booty, we actually developed this Krell Canyon level in A Crack in Time.
Okay, yeah, actually, the level traversal in Crack in Time as Ratchet, it's really fun when you have like those hover boots, and you're just sort of zipping around everywhere. That's super fun to do. I really love that part of the game, and I love the story of Alistair Azimuth. I love his relationship with Ratchet. Like everything about Crack in Time, I love, except how it's a Ratchet and Clank game. If it was just like its own thing, I think I would really be able to have fallen in love with it more.
Remember that mythology branch called the Court of Azimuth? Well, from that branch alone, we were inspired to create a Lombax character named Alistair Azimuth. It was a huge reveal for fans, and he helped us answer a lot of questions I mentioned earlier about Ratchet's history and Lombax War. We paid off other mythology branches as well. The Trachanoid stages became a full-on faction in Crack in Time.
So this game was massive, even featuring space exploration, which is something that we really wish we could have done in previous games. We finally got
Used to play this level a lot because it was the demo for this game. Ooh.
And even though our schedule was impossible, we kept piling more onto our plates for this one. So for example, there was this idea that was pitched to our team about space radio, where as you travel around the galaxy, you could actually listen to different stations. I think the audio guys were playing a lot of GTA at the time. And it felt like something that could be really fun for Ratchet and Clank. But I had something like 3 days to write hours of commercials, DJ segues, banter, news broadcasts. Implementing it is, I'm told, a nightmare. The audio guys did it, not me. But this was an opportunity to build out our mythology and take one step closer to the feel of a living, breathing universe. And everybody loved it. And I think it ended up being one of the biggest sort of selling points of the game.
And it's always a great sign when you're working on a project.
I'm a big World of Warcraft player, and I feel that way with the expansions. They would be fine if they weren't Warcraft.
And it's kind of late in production, and we feel like feature creep's been hitting us pretty hard, and then you put in this other request, but everyone's really excited to make it happen.
Yeah.
Radio stations would have been cool, and I think those also would have really worked well with the license. Sort of brought it back to... Sorry, had to stand up for a second. Brought it back to these weird, cynical, and crazy advertisements for products.
So not only could you fly to these different planets, of course, you could visit these small spherical worlds. And this, of course, was something that we had developed in Going Commando. Around the same time, our animators were really hitting their stride.
Yeah, but you did the spherical worlds better in Going Commando.
Plays. Yes. Sorry.
Quick! Everyone inside the temple! Ocelot is coming! All right, Quark. You ready to let those stallions out of the stable?
I was born ready.
I believe Dr. Nefarious was clear as to the repercussions of leaving your hull. The clock is ours.
Whoa, wait.
Who? Dr. Nefarious has no authority here, villain. In fact, I'm not even entirely convinced he's a real doctor. So return my sidekick's power before I bring the thunder. You win again, technology.
I'm off to eat.
As you can see,
I'm
our
just hanging
animators
out.
had
Yeah,
that
thanks for
Captain
coming.
Captain
Thanks for
Captain.
coming.
Of course, we even had Nurse Quark.
I love them. As we headed towards the end of production for our Crack in Time, Brian and I talked about what to do with Dr. Nefarious. We were fairly convinced this was going to be our last Ratchet and Clank game, and we wanted to kill him off in spectacular fashion, something poetic and nuanced and beautifully tragic. Then we put him on top of a flying saucer and slammed him into his own space station. We even hired an outside effects house to vaporize the entire level after the crash. So, we made this guy super dead, and I remember feeling really sorry for whatever poor writer would have the task of resurrecting him down the line. We felt at the time that this was the perfect send-off for such an iconic villain, but of course, if you played other games in the series, you know this came back to bite me. I remember how during the first game, Ratchet was kind of a sarcastic jerk. By this time, we had evolved him to the point where he could have moments like this.
So, I can't talk you out of this, can I? Ratchet, we have been on many adventures, but the clock needs someone to protect it. It is what I was built for.
Oh no, Clank. It's strange that they
Our
don't show
animators
me the
actually spent
footage.
more time on that one shot than any other shot in our cinematics. And fans sent me messages saying that this is the first time a Ratchet and Clank game ever made them cry.
And I hope you all realized that there would be spoilers when you came to this talk. So.
So Crack in Time hit all of our franchise DNA. It was a buddy story with heart, imaginative weapons, robust space exploration, gadgets, Quark, vibrant visuals, Douglas Adams-inspired humor, and a great balance of shooting and platforming.
And then some.
Sure.
Favorites, features from past games, plus some familiar ones. TJ, I agree, this was definitely our favorite game in the series, and what we consider to be a peak for the franchise. But
Did the game have a
we
space
hard
radio?
lesson here, which is
I thought they were
don't get
talking about it not having it.
So every peak has its valley. One of the things that was interesting is that, a lot of times long-running series face franchise fatigue. We'd shipped what we thought was our best game and our last one. But yet it had done well enough to warrant some sequels. And so we knew that there were still people out there who wanted Ratchet and Clank. But reviewers who liked the game were raising concerns that the series was getting a bit long in the tooth. So this was another time for us to adapt or die. And the next 3 years, the series took a number of detours.
Yeah, okay, see, this is what I'm talking about, where these guys, they need to stop listening to the reviewers. Okay, if the game is selling well, you don't need to listen to the reviewers. The reviewers are like, oh my god, I'm getting a bit fatigued. Why don't you make dumb, gimmicky spin-offs that have the team work, they have Ratchet work together with a big team, and those games are uninteresting and nobody plays them. And then you have to reboot the whole thing 5 years later. It's ridiculous. Stop doing that.
What we learned after A Crack in Time was that friendly family games were moving into other popular genres like couch co-op.
I remember it had the Space Pirates doing a show.
We're also finding that fewer younger players were playing less console games and were migrating towards mobile.
So we decided to make a 4-player co-op game, Ratchet and Clank All for One. And notice that we have our pal Dr. Nefarious in the bottom right. That's the same guy we smashed into a space station. So here's another little bonus tip for you. Never ring a bell if there's even a slight chance that the publisher might want it on rug. because after we shipped The Crack in Time, Chad Dezern and Sean McCabe, they pitched this new Ratchet game to Sony. The one key piece of feedback they received was to make Dr. Nefarious a playable character.
Ugh.
I just remember hearing this and my jaw dropped. I was like, we just flew that dude into a space station. And Greg Phillips was like, maybe it was just a flesh wound. So I used the Ratchet and Clank comic to get Nefarious off the saucer before it crashed. Mayhaps not my
That said, it's amazing that not continuing the series is never an option. You're not wrong. I do admire that they're like, yeah, we'll just keep making these forever. I do like that, and I'm not even joking. Because, like, yeah, not every Ratchet game is going to be a 10 out of 10, but every now and then you get a really good one.
Elegant retcon, but I think you got to give me a pass on this one, folks.
So the game had a number of highlights. It took some of our classic Ratchet gadgets, like the
Played this a few
cannon
times,
and
but
the
I was kind of
slingshot,
tapped out
and
from
turned
the
them into
start.
these
Yeah, I
really
can
cool
believe
co-op
that.
devices. You could actually grab other characters and like throw them off of platforms. You could have a chain of characters swinging along on swing shots.
I don't
And
hate
it's also
the
a
sort
very
of chippy
gorgeous
animation
game.
style.
I also thought it'd be funny to make Captain Quark President Quark, because I felt like the idea of a lying, pompous, blowhard celebrity getting elected president would be hilarious.
Oh my
It's
god.
a joke that has not aged well.
Political satire.
So All for One embraced many elements of our franchise DNA, but excluded some, most notably the buddy story and the third-person shooting mechanics.
One criticism we weren't prepared for was the title.
But also, the president in the third game was already that. Like, the sequence when Dr. Nefarious was changing everyone into a robot, his response to that was to go on television and have, like, a robot mask cover half his face and be like, well, I'm half robot myself. Because he wanted to, like, he was trying to, like, harness the robot votes for his re-election campaign. So it's like, you already did this, you know?
Fans just found it too kid-friendly. For the record, like, Chad and Sean's original title was Foreplay. When that one didn't clear, the one that I tried to push through was Multiple Organisms.
And there you go.
And there you go. There you have it. I think that may have been the fastest no I ever received from Sony.
I was actually being a bit ironic.
Okay, so,
Yeah, okay.
it succeeded
I
financially,
still agree with
and
what
there
you
was a lot of
said.
love for it, but many fans and critics were also disappointed.
Because, like, and this is going to be really sad to hear, but Insomniac games, like, what else do they do? Resistance, okay. Sunset Overdrive, I actually hear that game's fine. They did that game Fuse or Rise or whatever it wound up being called that just turned out to be nothing. And now they just do, like, Spider-Man games, and it's like, well, you know, maybe you should have just continued making Ratchet games forever. Maybe that would have been better. And I know people love those Spider-Man games, but I prefer this.
What followed was Full Frontal Assault, which returned to classic gunplay. It had this tower defense context, but it lacked this heartfelt buddy story and the feeling of space exploration. 2013's Into the Nexus was more of a return to form, but felt like a half step towards the epic adventure that people expected. So looking at this graph of the series, and this isn't like an accurate, like I didn't actually measure out, but
Not to scale.
It's not to scale, yes. It's clear that we hit a bit of a lull with these last three games. You know, while some of these experimental games had done well, the reception from fans and drones was mixed. But that's okay, because what we found is that you really need to embrace the unknown. And I realize that there's a bit of a contradiction here where I'm like saying, well, we adapted or died, but we also had to embrace our franchise DNA. And the truth is that it's a tough line to walk. You know, you have to constantly evolve, you have to constantly change, but then you also have to know what's made things great. And trying to stick that landing.
From a business point of view, it totally makes sense to keep at it.
So,
yeah, I also feel
realize
like,
that
you know,
Super Series
just
don't
creatively,
have
I think it's
people
interesting
that
to
have
see these
to
games
keep
continue.
experiments, to move it into new directions. So now around the same time as we were working on Into the Nexus, development for Ratchet and Clank the movie had begun. And for us, this was a sign that we had really hit it.
Wild stuff that James Arnold Taylor and David Kai are not top billing in their movie.
Big. Never did I dream that there'd be a movie based on this franchise with Paul Giamatti, Sylvester Stallone, Rosario Dawson, and John Goodman. It was great to know that Ratchet, Clank, and Quark would be voiced by the original actors, though.
And while we had some influence over the film, we knew that we had to do right by the fans and make a great game despite being in the position of making a game based on a movie based on the original game. The team had the challenges that we never had to face before because after I wrote the original draft of the movie...
I do think it would be interesting if they did a Ratchet Clank in-universe game without having Ratchet and Clank as the main characters.
So we had to experience the thrills of parallel development with an animated movie that was constantly in flux.
Okay, so what I'm learning is that this guy is basically my mortal enemy. I think that more or less everything this guy said is bad, and I'm beginning to see now how bringing like a writer, quote unquote, into these games has not been a good development.
Insomniac's North Carolina studio director Chad Dezern suggested that the PS4 game, rather than being called a reboot, that we thought of it as a reimagination.
And the movie was going through numerous rewrites, and we were always playing keep up with the changes.
Can you believe it's been 7 years since we got the remake?
And since the movie storyline deviated from Insomniac's mythology, this presented a challenge. How do we make a game that feels like our universe when it's based on a movie that's since departed from its source material? Our solution was to tell the story through the eyes of an unreliable narrator. This guy, my favorite character, Captain Quark. Here he is getting the full spa treatment over in Zora Dune Prison.
Oh, he's his favorite character. Shock. Shock with how oversaturated the games he works on are with this freaking guy.
Shooting mechanics and RPG gameplay. I actually went back and tried to play the original Ratchet Clank, and like all the controls were so weird to me. I had trouble just like shooting something. So we took all the lessons that we had learned over the entire series, and we improved the game and brought it up to date.
Did you though?
Visit to this game, where Ratchet could fly his ship in a city with an insane amount of detail. So ultimately, revisiting our original game helped us re-embrace what made the series great: a robot and furry alien from opposite sides of the galaxy who team up to stop a supervillain and become friends in the process. We had this wonderful opportunity to have this epic do-over. We took everything we used about what made Ratchet and Clank, the world that the characters inhabited, and how to face challenges optimistically and at times fire our engines into the unknown.
And of course,
isn't it interesting that when they take all of the lessons they've learned and just make the first game again, it's worse.
Games are made by the best teams. We count ourselves very lucky to have worked with some of the incredibly talented individuals over at Insomniac.
Yeah, it's been an amazing ride, and I just want to thank a few thank yous. Nolan North did the voice actually he's Nathan Drake of Sigmund, and also Amy Hennig helped us mentor this talk. And I just want to thank Sony, all the Insomniacs.
Jeez, they brought Nolan North in for that. That guy will do anything.
Such an amazing franchise. So thanks for coming, and it looks like we have about 14 minutes or 13 minutes for questions. Thank you.
directingvideogames.com. So I'm gonna message him about getting Brian Hastings' document about crates at this address.
So yeah, if you could, thank you. Yeah, if you step up. Yes.
Hi, I wanted to ask about my favorite recurring planet Burbank, and ask why, in the first place, the Insomniac Museum was added to the games, why some didn't get them, and the varying levels of that.
I feel like, is that Mike Stout? I can barely see. Oh, maybe not. Okay, I thought, so Mike Stout, he was one of our designers. I thought I recognized someone over there. It looks just like it's Mike Stout's doppelganger over there, actually. He actually, we had all this cool like stuff that we were throwing away that we wanted people to see. And so he actually spent extra time. He was originally helping out in QA on the first game, and then he started to do some design work and became this great designer. And so he just, in his spare time, laid out this level. He mapped out the Burbank floor. And it was always something that we ended up doing kind of, like someone would take on this project. We never scheduled it in, because all of our schedules were like maxed out. There was no room for them. But in Into the Nexus, we actually did dedicate some time to a museum level, and we gave it all the proper artwork and everything. But that's something that I feel like should be in every Ratchet and Clank game moving forward, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions? Feel free to step up to the mic. We don't throw anything or bite.
Oh, I have so many questions, and I'm just limited by the time I live in that I can't ask him.
Oh, we got someone right.
Can you enlighten us on the art of stacking boxes?
Oh, thank you!
Sure, so the question...
Oh my god! Oh my god, heaven sent me an angel in the crowd.
The art of stacking boxes, and how did that work? I would have to go back and reread that doc, but I remember it was in A Crack in Time, that temple level. We had this big open space, and there were giant stacks, like 10 crates high by like 10 crates deep. Yeah. And there was just like multiple versions of them, and we just were like getting really tired because there's this weird compulsion to actually clear out all the boxes. And then once we make you do that for like 10 minutes in like this one room, it starts to get kind of painful. So so in his document, he specified the rhythm, the amount of boxes, and then how to stack them, and also to vary it up in such a way where you could have explosive boxes in some crates that would encourage the wrench throw. You'd typically stack boxes behind enemies that were explosive, so you could knock an enemy into them. We actually had special code where the enemy would magnet kind of to the crates, so that you would typically see them getting thrown through them. So there's lots of little things like that that just made it so much more satisfying.
And one thing just to add to that is that the bolts that would pop out of those crates, I thought it was interesting when I joined Insomniac, the audio team told me that they actually based that sound on Vegas slot machines because those were designed to make you feel happy when you would collect the coins. So there's even like a little bit of psychology in there.
Oh.
Thank you.
Hi. I got into Ratchet and Clank with the PS3 games, and that was my first introduction to them.
Poser.
And I usually
Normie.
don't like games, but I love that.
Bandwagon fan.
They would just banter during the level, and they would banter on the way to a level on the ship. And once I completed the story, and I wanted to 100%, they stopped talking completely. And when you would travel in a ship, it's like they were deliberately mad at each other or something. Like, and it's like I would never hear their voices again.
They spend too long together.
Yeah.
After a cabin fever sets in.
It was so weird. I've never experienced that feeling of, oh, I'm kind of sad now. They're not talking now. Is that a complaint that's ever come up?
It's not a complaint, but it's certainly something that we always look into because it's like in A Crack in Time, I remember vividly that there were 10,000 lines of dialogue that I wrote that made it into the game. And that's not counting what we cut, which was probably another 10,000 to be honest with you. And like
Yeah. How many of those lines are good? Resident Clank 1 has like 500 lines of dialogue, and it's so much better, man.
We dump these massive amounts of dialogue into the game. There's always somebody who has to go in there and balance them and make sure they don't play too much too often, they don't trip over each other. So it may have been a cooldown issue. It may have just been like they were afraid that it would start to get too repeaty, something like that. It's like balancing dialogue in a game so that it doesn't trip over anything else that you're doing is a full-time job in and of itself. So something we're always constantly working on.
And just to add to that, when we first implemented like Mr. Zircon, I think we had Clank talking, we'd have like these updates. And at one point, one person was like, I just want this game to shut up. It was just like everything was talking all the time. So we had to actually figure out the right pacing for that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep.
Yes, you didn't though. You needed to scale it way further back.
My question is, with like the newest game and the movie, they made Ratchet's face like rounder and like softer, and I was just kind of wondering if you guys know why, because it didn't like look like Ratchet anymore. Like it still felt like Ratchet, but didn't really. I don't know. It was kind of uncanny.
Oh my god, she's trying to be mean, but she's got too kind of a heart. You made Ratchet a bitch, guys. Remember the first game when he was like cool? He was a total Chad, and you made him a bitch in the remake.
Yeah, I know what you mean. At first, like the plan when because I was working with the team during the first couple months of the Ratchet movie, and we sent all our assets basically up to them with the idea that the same assets would be used in the movie. But ultimately, when they pulled it into their animation software, it didn't translate very well, so they actually had to rebuild everything. And we had animators and artists who would give as much feedback as they could, not just when it came to the models, but also the way that Ratchet smiles, the way that Clank wilts his head, that kind of thing. And unfortunately, this is something that goes with the territory. Anytime you have somebody who hasn't been working on that franchise for 15 years, where they do their best to mimic, but sometimes it just doesn't work out the way fans expect.
Yeah, this was interesting on Tools of Destruction. We did a commercial for it. Digital Domain, who's this amazing effects house, animated Ratchet. And we're like, who is that guy? Because his face was off, everything was different. And even though they had super talented animators, we ended up creating like a model sheet where one of our animators did poses of his face so that people could follow it. And it's really hard to get right. Like when people start to know a character really well, you can tell when it's off. Question over here.
Hi. So Ratchet and Clank got me into the games industry. So I was just curious, like, what got you guys into the industry?
Oh, wow.
Wow, that's a great question.
Well, the thing that got me into the game industry, I mean, it's funny, like when I'd always been a gamer ever since I was a kid, and I even remember when I was 12, I wrote a story for Super Mario Brothers, and I sent it into the address on the back of a Nintendo Power magazine, because in my mind, everything was just in one building, and they would just like run up and use it. But it didn't really work out like that. But when I came out to LA to start a writing career, I also had a background in computer animation and ended up doing QA and doing like design work over at Insomniac.
Insert Sonic meme here.
And I found out that I wrote, and then that became sort of my big entrance into the industry.
Yeah, I actually started playing games in the early 80s. I was totally into the Atari. I went to the Smoky.
Mark Cerny's, he actually created Marble Madness, and I believe he created that as a prototype for how to do 3D Sonic games. And yeah, that's kind of his origin.
Arcades all the time, played all the games there. And then at a certain point, I kind of stopped playing games. I just really wanted to figure out how to make them. I spent a lot of the time in the 80s messing around with my Commodore 64, trying to figure out how to program. I was like super nerdy. And then I didn't realize I could actually get a job in the early 90s as a game designer or an artist. So fortunately, this opportunity just came up where I could do art. And back in 1991, artists were actually scared.
Oh my God, imagine just like, oh yeah, you know programming, why don't you come in here and make fun video games? Today, if you want to get a job programming video games, it's like, so we're going to make this mobile game. And the whole objective is to just siphon money out of people's wallets.
Of computers. They just wanted to use paintbrushes. They didn't want to touch that stuff. And I was like one of the few people willing to do that. So I ended up getting a job and doing something I really love to do. Thank you. That's a great question. I don't know how we're on time. It's 12:30, but I think we got. What's the fist mean? Does that mean? One more question. Gotcha. Okay, one more question.
All right, one question. How much did you guys share tech with Naughty Dog? Because I remember vaguely that the Jack and Daxter engine was the same one that you guys used for Ratchet and Clank, and when they made a sequel, you would update your tech. And for how long did you guys do that?
So that's a great question. It comes up a lot, and unfortunately I wasn't a tech guy working on it. I know that we didn't just outright take their engine; they didn't just outright take ours. There were lots of components that we tried to share, but it's always hard to kind of integrate that tech, especially back then. So in the very early days, there was definitely some components that were being shared. I just don't know the specifics of that.
Because I remember the patch rendering, and then the vehicles got added, and Jack and Daxter 2 and some other went into Ratchet and Clank 3. And...
Yeah, we typically didn't share any gameplay code. It's more on the rendering side.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks. Okay, I think that's it. Oh, wait. Uh-oh.
If anybody has any further questions, the speakers can go to room 2022 or 2024 around the area over there for further questions and Q&A with tables.
Okay, we will be there. It's 2022.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, everybody.
So there we have it, people. I like this conversation. Definitely learned a lot. TJ Fixman is my mortal enemy. Gonna have to find him and hurt him like he hurt me. But yeah, this was fun. If you have any ideas for future streams like this, be sure to let me know in the streaming channel on the Discord, which should be linked in the description. I am gonna go and get something to drink, and then I'm gonna go to sleep. Thanks everybody for showing up. Bye bye.